Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. Lots going on, I suppose, in the world of Norwich City this week. Defeat on Tuesday night at Watford, the AGM last night, which is what we're on here to react to. This lunchtime, of course, we've got David Wagner's press conference coming up this afternoon ahead of the long trip to Bristol City on Sunday. And joining me to talk everything AGM is my colleague Connor Southwell. Of course, we want your comments, questions, feelings, statements around last night, and whether that be around the AGM more generally or the interview that is now live on our channels, which I'm sure lots of you who are watching this would have consumed by this point. Connor, we'll kind of split this into two elements almost, the AGM itself and then the interview with us and the other local media outlets moving forwards. And of course, we'll get around to the comments and questions. What was your take more generally on the AGM meeting? Of course, an hour and a half or so. There was lots of kind of topical points, everything from Atanasio's future, the kind of January transfer window, David Wagner's future, the financial situation of the football club, meat pies, vegan poultry pies. There was everything thrown in there. When you walked out of that meeting, what was your kind of take from that?
I think my take as I left the meeting was I think everyone who was sat at the top table at Norwich City would be breathing not a sigh of relief, because I think that would be overstating it slightly, but I think they would be pretty pleased with the evening as a whole. There were a couple of kind of spiky interventions, totally fair and totally balanced and very passionately made, may I add, by the two gentlemen that made those. But yeah, you're right. It was. I think the moment that I kind of sat there and thought, wow, is the second question, AGM, everything going on at Norwich City, fan feeling, the way the fan feeling is, however you want to dice and chop it up or percentage it, whatever. And the second question is about golden goal raffle tickets and vegan balti pies being too hot at Carrow Road. And I've rubbed my hands. Here we go. We're back at the AGM. This is what we want. They're always really intriguing evenings, because even though I know everyone in there is a shareholder, but they're also predominantly a fan as well. And there was a lot to engage with and a lot to ask. I felt some really good, important stuff around the finances as well. There were 3 questions on the women's team, which is fantastic. I think it shows that there is a real drive and hunger to increase that area, and there's a real want from some shareholders as well to see growth in that area. And it's nice to hear Ben Napper commit to helping grow that area alongside Flo Allen. So that was good. There was some good stuff on analytics. There was some good stuff on data. Mark Atanasio spoke really well. I felt, for not just in the actual AGM, but the interview afterwards also. And yeah, look, there was some tough questions. There was some nicer questions. There was some bizarre topics. It had everything you would want from an AGM. But yeah, I was probably left thinking that those on the top table will have felt that it was quite a comfortable, relatively night, I would suspect.
Yeah, a few heated moments at different points between those shareholders involved and Delia Smith particularly. We'll sort of pick up different topics as long as we go here. We'll start off with kind of the model, I suppose, the strategy. There was a reference to Ipswich and the way they're doing things at the moment. Of course, they spoke about David Wagner, and Ben Napper was quite quick to sort of reference the fact he's only been in the building for 18 days and he still maybe needs a little bit of time to assess the situation. Delia referenced to player injuries and kind of the crisis as she I suppose referenced it. It has probably disagree with that, and it's something that apparently we've not really referenced across our channels. I think we definitely have spoken about the injuries at different points. I disagree with the crisis element, but definitely have mentioned that Norwich have had difficulties fielding certain positions and certain players, of course, at different points. Just on that, Connor, what were your kind of reflections on the answers that were given to that particular point?
About the injuries, do you mean, or about
the injuries and kind of the model and strategy moving forwards?
Yeah, I didn't feel that. It's incredibly difficult, first and foremost, for Ben Napper, I think, to come in and have a big overarching view and an understanding of where he wants to take Norwich City because of context, and he needs to understand what's gone on before as well as what he wants to do in the future. I know, obviously, he referenced, particularly when asked about David Wagner, about being in the building 18 days and needing a period of assessment. I think actually, if you strip the emotion out of it and you look at it rationally, I think considered look at it was important. I think maybe the question mark will come over how long that period of assessment can last and how long it's kind of viable for supporters if performances and results maintain as they are. And I guess what I really get the sense of listening to Ben Napper, listening to Mark Atanasio, is this kind of real conflict maybe between where Norwich City are in the short term and kind of the long-term aspirations for it. So Ben Napper spoke a lot about bringing the age profile down, about academy products, about shifting kind of footballing cultures, being a lot more savvy in terms of recruitment. Obviously, the data and the analytics stuff, which Mark Atanasio has played a major role in. All of these kind of things are at odds with where it feels like Norwich City are at the moment, with a squad that is aging really, and Ben Napper referred to the squad being too old yesterday. Results not being particularly good. It's really difficult, I think, to try and paint a long-term picture when the current picture is what it is, and people aren't very happy with it. So and yeah, as for the injury line, I think this idea that we've not mentioned it is revisionism of wonderful proportions, really. I think we have spoken about it, but there's a difference between maybe speaking about it and taking it as gospel. Like you say, I don't agree that at any point this has really been an injury crisis. And I referenced a statistic, I think it was shortly after the Leeds game, where this line might have been used for the first time, but there were at that stage 8 players in that Norwich City team, barring I think basically the front 2 and Angus Gunn, who had only just dropped out of the side. There were 8 players in that 11 who were fit and available that had played in that 4-0 win at Huddersfield earlier on in the season. And also, I think maybe barring Cardiff, where the centre-back situation was a little bit difficult and they could only go with 2, they've had players play in natural positions all of the time. Nobody's been playing out of position apart from Kenny McLean as a central defender, but at times that was choice. Danny Bart was on the bench at Sunderland when it happened, and they had Jaden Warner on the bench the other night when David Wagner decided to make that decision again. So I think it's a really interesting point. I think it's and also I think the other point just finally that I would make on injuries is that other teams have it, and I think it says a lot about your squad depth and a lot about where you are as a group and the situation where a couple of injuries are so detrimental. And also, you put Angus Gunn in that game against Watford. Does that mean that Norwich City don't concede 21 shots? Of course it doesn't. It might mean they scrape a draw or whatever. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think it changes the outcome in the same way that at the moment you put Josh Sargent in this team, you're basically dependent on him scoring quite a few goals every game from a very limited amount of opportunities that Norwich City are creating. So I don't necessarily agree with the fact that this dip in form is because of, and it's not dip now, it's probably a lot worse than that, is due to injuries. So I disagree with the point on injuries, and equally I understand why David Wagner, why Delia, why the board of directors would point to that, because it is something that exists, that is relevant, that creates a debate. So I completely understand it, but yeah, I disagree with it. So look, it is kind of what it is, I suppose. You can't change it, and you have to be durable, and ultimately it's down to the coach and the head coach and his coaching team to adapt and to change and to make sure that Norwich are still successful and can still function without players. Because if you're waiting until December, January to get players back, as we've seen, suddenly the gap to the top 6 is 6 points, and the mood is very, very difficult. So I don't really buy it, if I'm completely honest with you, Adam.
Yeah, lots of praise for Mark Atanasio here in the comments section. Lots of comments flooding through. We'll try our best to get through as many as we can. I thought he spoke quite well, actually, one in our interview with him as well, but also the AGM more generally about kind of his morals, his values, the direction that the football club's going. There's a question here from Sproston Ripper. Atanasio referenced that the club will continue to be self-funding. What do you think that looks like under him? More loans, I'm guessing. What's your take on that, Connor? Would you agree there with the assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I put this question to him because I think there's been a lot of debate because of the recent financial accounts about Norwich City as a self-funding football club, and I found his answer really interesting. He kind of led on it, really, and I think the question I said was, does it need to evolve in terms of how you operate as a self-funding club? And I think how we thought of that in recent years is what Norwich City generate in terms of player sales, in terms of commercial revenues, is kind of used to keep the business functioning. That was basically it. And I think ultimately it was quite a long answer from Mark Atanasio, and you can go and read them over at pinken.com, exactly what he said. And as you said, Adam, you can go and watch it on our YouTube channel as well. But what he said essentially was, and I think he agreed in essence, but more about how it would be self-funding in terms of loans provided by him and his group. They would regard that still as self-funding because it is part of that kind of ownership group that they have. And he kind of made the point that what he's been really good at throughout his career, really, he's a venture capitalist. What he's very, very good at is raising capital and getting people to invest in projects and situations. And that was the point that he was making. And it's less sort of about the self-funding at very, very low levels and more about kind of those loans and stuff being kind of their own, if that makes sense, being invested by Atanasio and his group rather than Norwich City going to a bank and asking for a loan. I guess in maybe kind of a way that we've seen with how they've kind of financed some debt repayment around Mark Atanasio in the last year or so, related to obviously the shareholder movements and all of those kind of dynamics. So his interpretation of self-funding, I think, is slightly different to where Norwich City are at the moment. He spoke about stadium expansion and training ground improvement. It is money being generated from him and his group, but they would regard that as self-funding. So I think there is a shift in position there. I think, look, you only need to look at the accounts to recognise that shift in position as well. So that's really interesting, this kind of change of tact, and that I think is the first time that it's been properly communicated. So yeah, I think it does represent, and I'm sure if we get to a situation that Mark Atanasio does assume overall control of Norwich City, that will be the policy moving forward. And I think, to be fair, that probably chimes with what he's done in Milwaukee with the Brewers during his 17, 18 years over there as well.
Yeah, so a lot of the theme of the comments are mainly around Delia Smith and some of the comments from last night. We will definitely address that topic in just a moment. Staying around kind of the governance, I suppose, of football. You asked a question to Delia and Michael and Mark quite directly. That was kind of, I suppose the reaction was slightly interesting. A few people have picked up on the sort of the reaction across socials. I mean, at the time, Connor, how did you kind of, I suppose, react to that response? And to maybe looking back at it now, what do you make of the answer that they gave more generally?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult in those situations, because obviously you don't have an opportunity, and I do it even when I do these videos. Sometimes you think, oh, did I phrase that quite right? Did I say that in the way that I intended? Did I ask the question the way I wanted to ask the question? And the way they kind of responded to it, I was kind of going, I must not have phrased that correctly, because I think they took it in a way maybe that it wasn't intended. And I think for me, I've always been brought up more deeply, I guess, to kind of be respectful, and you can ask difficult questions and be really respectful and ask direct questions, and if you do it in the right way. And I felt this was an important point to raise, because supporters have said to me directly through social media, some of my family who are big Norwich City fans have raised this to me. I've seen it mentioned in various podcasts away from our channels, message boards. This has been a topic of conversation about governance structures and the way the board operates, even down. And I only gave one example in kind of the follow up to her in terms of the Stuart Webber Zoe Webber connection, which has been raised as we know. We've discussed it before on the podcast, but you could even talk about the lack of kind of chairperson or those type of governance structures. So all of those elements, I think, was I surprised by the reaction? Partially, I think, because I didn't feel it was a particularly provocative question. I felt it was just an opportunity maybe to reassure supporters and maybe even stick up for their operations to an extent. And what was interesting for me was kind of less their response to it. And look, I ask questions. It's up to people how they engage with them, what they think of them. That's fine. I just ask questions. That's just my job. What for me was interesting was the fact that Mark Atanasio felt a couple of questions later that he wanted to come back and almost readdress it and answer it to an extent. So that was really interesting. But yeah, look, I understand it, that they're in a difficult position. They had an intense night in terms of the AGM. She got quite heated in there. I think she's been quite had similar responses to other questions in other interviews that she conducted last night. So yeah, ultimately it's up to her to answer why she responded the way she did. But yeah, looking back, I probably wouldn't ask the question any differently, I don't think. And I think, ultimately I'm here to try and get answers for supporters, and that's kind of what was at the forefront of my mind, to be honest. So yeah, that's that question and their response to it. Obviously it's up to the supporters to decide whether they're happy or not with how they dealt and how they handled with that particular question.
Yeah, obviously, a lot of people want to move on to the topic, I suppose, of kind of the fan negativity. We'll keep that for just a moment. We'll just go down the route of
Keep him
Stuart
wanting
Webber.
more.
Stuart Webber and his sort of tenure. They were asked to kind of reflect, I suppose, on his time at the football club. I mean, Delia referenced kind of the Timu Pukki arrival and Emi Buendia picking him up for a very low fee. There's been a lot of transfers, I could say, since then that have been nowhere near kind of the success levels of those two that she mentioned for quite a number of years, really. If we talk more generally about players that are brought in under the Stuart Webber regime, I suppose Gabrielle Sarah's maybe the more recent one, but there's not been many. What was your kind of take on their sort of feelings towards him, and maybe they said that he could still be someone that they could go and lean on if they felt that there was that Ben Napper maybe needed some advice. So yeah, just your take on that, really, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, they went stronger than that. They said he's in contact with Ben fairly regularly. I think he's obviously still contracted to the club until March, so I think in an unofficial capacity as a friend, they feel if they asked him a question, he would give them, and I'm sure he would, an honest answer and use of his knowledge. So yeah, I think it is really interesting, and it maybe hints to what we spoke about in the podcast after Cardiff, when obviously there was this dynamic where Stuart Webber received a guard of honour, having a week earlier at Carrow Road had Chance essentially calling for him to hasten his departure, shall we say, in a more diplomatic way. It was a little bit more forceful and blunt than that, and I think it maybe gets to the heart of this kind of internal view of Stuart Webber that there always was from lots of people around his work and what he achieved, and maybe the external view that the fans had of him and the delivery of kind of the stuff that he was overseeing, in terms of I think it's a really interesting dynamic how it's all played out. It's the first time, I know we're kind of talking about their praise, but Delia said to me it's the first time that I've really seen them kind of admit that there was a breakdown in terms of relations with supporters. She kind of pinpointed that occasion after Newcastle as the moment that happened, which is interesting. That's not something that we've heard, and of course they're going to stand up for him because they work closely to him. They developed a deep personal relationship with him over a real period of years. He's someone that they felt very loyal to and very indebted to for what he brought to the club and the success. So I understand that, and it's difficult, I think, when you do that in business. And I've seen a few kind of criticisms that some fans have made, not that I would necessarily agree with, about maybe the closeness of that particular relationship, but ultimately it was going to end. And chances are in football, as we know, with head coaches, with sporting directors, with owners, a lot of the time these things tend to end on bad notes as a general rule of thumb. And if they don't, it's because someone's gone on and taken a job somewhere that everyone regards as a significant upgrade. That hasn't happened with Stuart Webber. It could have happened. So interesting, really interesting. But I think maybe that's just the word I'd use to describe the whole thing. Very, very, very interesting. And it's been really interesting to, I don't want to keep saying interesting. It's been, really insightful, I think, how the fans have responded to it, and really intriguing to see that. And in Stuart Webber in particular, I think there's clearly a sense, and it was interesting to hear Ben Napper say as well, of an end of a cycle, and that increasingly the club feels like that's kind of where it's positioned at the moment.
Yeah, tying that into Ben Napper, they spoke kind of about the process of bringing him to the football club and the way that the interviews took place. Delia sort of referenced that he was the outstanding candidate and someone who maybe is similarly aligned to what Stuart Webber was like as a sporting director. Of course, it was Ben Napper's first AGM as well. What did you make of his comments more generally, but also kind of that interview process? Did you kind of take anything from those comments?
Yeah, I thought Ben Napper was really good, to be honest with you. Really, really good, and spoke really well and honestly about the situation. I think, him saying that the squad is, and he was very direct. He said it's too old. It needs to come down, and even kind of hinted that some of the work in the summer that they did hadn't been helpful with that process. It's something that I think we've been highlighting for a little while. 11 players over the age of 37 of those are contracted beyond the end of the season. That's going to be a very live issue that persists over the next 2, maybe even 3 years of this football club, and kind of unpicking that, I guess. And I thought he was very good in terms of the women's team and the analytics and January as well, and the need links to my last point about identifying younger players, but how that may also come at a need to actually invest some money, and the role that Mark Atanasio would obviously play in that. We spoke a little bit about self-financing, and he is going to produce a report that he presents to the board at some stage, which is almost like a football audit. And as part of that, I'm sure David Wagner's position will be mentioned and scrutinised and a judgment passed either way by the board. So I think it is really interesting, because at the moment it all feels like we're in a holding pattern. It feels like we're in a holding pattern with the head coach. It feels like we're in a holding pattern with the ownership kind of situation. It's difficult for supporters, like I said, because the long-term vision and on the horizon there is plenty of hope, I think, for Norwich City fans in terms of Mark Atanasio's involvement. And when you watch the video, and I know we're going to talk about Delia and Michael in particular, but a lot of what Mark Atanasio said was very good, very encouraging, very modern, very forward thinking. I spoke to a few members of his team last night as well, who were kind of in and around, and they completely understand the frustrations of supporters. Completely. There's no kind of head in the sand from their perspective. They know what needs to change, and they're really keen to change it as well. So there is hope from that perspective. Ben Napper as well, someone who does really impress, and he's different to Stuart Webber in the sense that I think he's a lot more considered, both in terms of that public persona, but also in terms of his decision making and the way he interacts with other people, the way he even produces reports and the way he communicates and interacts with different departments. All of that it represents a shift, but equally it does nothing, I know and acknowledge, to represent where Norwich City are right now and to change that. So it is difficult. And of course, the perception is at the moment that he's kind of sitting on his hands, Ben Napper, in relation to the decision around David Wagner. And whether that's true or whether it isn't, I think there's clearly a balance that he is trying to strike between ensuring that the short term maintains stable, whether you want to argue if it's stable or not. I think we could have that debate, but ultimately it's about probably right now ensuring that they don't get pulled into something like a relegation battle, which I think, given the mood around it, would be disastrous, but also this shift to the long-term picture. And I think for me, it's at what point does that kind of maybe breaking point come, but also does that need to flick a switch and alter those two plans from the short-term path that they're on at the moment to that long-term picture. And he's probably got to weigh that up as well. So I was impressed by Ben Napper, and I hope the wider fan base are given an opportunity to hear from him, probably in a more long-form way, I guess, similarly to the type of audience that the majority shareholders and soon to be majority shareholder Mark Atanasio had last night, because that I think would answer a lot of questions that supporters have at this moment in time.
Yeah, there was a few disgruntled fans at David Wagner's absence at the AGM last night. Sort of, I suppose, a lot of fans have maybe seen Daniel Farke there before. They've seen Paul Lambert there before. They've seen Nigel Worthington there before. And Dean Smith wasn't someone that attended the AGM, but that's something that Michael Wynne-Jones is very quick to point out. He said it's been quite a few years now since a manager has turned up to an AGM. Were you surprised at David Wagner's lack of involvement last night in the AGM, or given kind of the circumstances around him and obviously the question marks around his future at the football club and the fans' frustration towards him and kind of the toxicity, I suppose, of the fan base at the moment? Do you think it was maybe the safest idea that Norwich didn't put him into that position, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it would have been slightly unfair if I'm honest with you, particularly when you've got this situation with a sporting director who clearly, as he basically said last night, is still assessing a situation. You put David Wagner up on that top table, and suddenly all of the debate becomes very football heavy. And ultimately, it is a shareholding meeting. It is about kind of issues off the pitch. And I guess they would argue that Ben Napper was there to represent the footballing department. I think that would maybe then lead on. You could ask, not that I necessarily would, because I think it's important that Neil Adams is there as well, particularly now as he's a technical director, but officially he's not heading up anything. So Ben Napper is the football lead. So for me, I think there is an argument where you say you either have David Wagner and Neil Adams, or you don't really have any or either of them, and you just have Ben Napper. So it is difficult, but also there's this precedent that's been set over a long number of years. You know, Glenn Roeder was there infamously with the I forgot your tenure as England manager debate. Paul Lambert was there and had a few spiky exchanges. Daniel Farke did attend until I think the very last year, but there was obviously some complications with COVID. So it is a shift in position. And I guess maybe, again, they would argue that it represents how they've shifted in terms of their policy, because at one point the manager did head up the footballing department. That was their operations. They had a CEO, chairman, manager, and that was how the football club operated. Now it's slightly different in terms of you've got an executive director, commercial director, you've got people heading up departments. So he ultimately sits under Ben Napper. So therefore Ben Napper is there to represent him. But I think there's a very credible argument that was made on the night, it's fair to say as well, and should be made that, I think there is an argument to say David Wagner should have attended. But ultimately he didn't. And, in many ways, it's quite a difficult situation. As Ben Napper said, he'd been in the building 18 days to then go and grapple with some of the questions that he was being asked is tough. But I think if there was any kind of night to maybe realise the extent of the role he's got on his hands, it was last night and the questions that he faced.
Yeah, there's a question here from Finley here. Was Sam Jeffrey in attendance? No, he was away on business, so he was excused from the meeting. And there's a good question somewhere up here. Here it is from Jim Howson. It seemed to me like Mark is the only one of the three that wants to keep David Wagner. What do you make of that assessment there, Connor? I mean, obviously it was asked by fans in the AGM, but it was also asked by us and the other local media outlets post kind of the AGM taking place. What did you make of the response to, I suppose, to that point?
I didn't necessarily get that sense, to be honest with you. I think there is a willingness, and he even said this, I think, to Rob Butler. There is a willingness to let Ben Napper come to a decision and for it to be his decision. And I think there is probably a wider point in terms of Norwich's structures that it's important that it is his decision. He is ultimately leading the football strategy. There is a long-term element to it. Therefore, he kind of does need to take that decision on his own. And so I think his position wasn't a supportive one. I think it was supportive in the sense that there's a head coach in charge. Let's back him. But I don't think it was it wasn't as unequivocal as David Wagner is, going to be the man for the next 3 years and let's give him a new contract and build a statue of him or anything like that. So I think there was kind of a careful tightrope being walked around that in particular. And that's because at the moment, a lot of people don't know, and they don't know what Ben Napper is thinking or the processes that he's undertaking. And as I said, I think it's probably part of a wider kind of football department audit that he's overseeing. Of course, this is very admirable, I think, this kind of willingness to have time and assess and get context. What will become interesting, it goes back to, to quote Paddy Davitt, who was quoting something else, I think, events, dear boy, events. If Norwich City get absolutely whacked on Sunday and we see the reaction from 1100 as it stands, Norwich City fans travelling to Bristol City, then ultimately that assessment probably does need to pacen. So you can have all the will in the world and you can have a plan, but events can alter that. And I think there are going to be very few Norwich City fans who are as understanding, as willing to give Ben Napper the benefit of the doubt if the performances and results under David Wagner continue as they have been in, it's 9 defeats in 14. I mean, as a statistic, really, it's woeful. So, he needs to, I think, come to a decision as quickly as humanly possible, not too quickly, but also we can't be sat here in a month's time, I don't think, questioning what's going to happen. And as soon as that decision is reached, it needs to be communicated to supporters and the argument made. So I didn't get the sense that there was that kind of level of support. And as I said, I spoke to members of Atanasio's team. They understand and agree with a lot of the frustrations that are coming from supporters. So, I think it's a case of giving Ben Napper the time and space that he needs to come to a verdict.
Yeah, I can see all the comments and questions flooding through. I promise we will come around to those very shortly. Connor, just want to talk about the Norwich women's team. That was a point that was referenced 3 times in an AGM, which is probably the first time that's ever been the case. Lots of questions around kind of travel to away games and kind of trying to build the attendances and the kind of exposure of the women's team. That was something that Zoe Webber was very prominently asked about and kind of how they moved the project forward. What was kind of your take on those questions and kind of the answers that were displayed by Zoe Webber particularly?
I thought the Ben Napper element is encouraging. It's really good to see the sporting director being positive about the women's team, wanting to engage with the the women's team, and someone who's come from Arsenal, which pre-Emma Hayes they were the most successful women's team in the country. So and actually there was a nice snippet in there from Ben Napper that he kind of produced an audit on the women's team about how to improve that. That's a fascinating bit of insight that I think is going to be really beneficial. So he knows kind of how to get the journey right and how to build that, and it is something that can really be built. So yeah, really encouraging. And as you said, Zoe Weber element as well in terms of trying to source away travel for fans hoping to attend women's games. They're very hard to get to. All of that is really encouraging, and I think gives a sense of growth. So the women's team's here to stay, and hopefully they'll continue what's been so far a fantastic season. And for anyone who doesn't know, we have the brilliant George Wilson, who heads up our coverage of the women's team. So make sure you check out all of his pieces and videos and all of that stuff on the women's team. There's some fantastic insight in there, and he's doing a really fantastic job at covering what is hopefully going to be a promotion campaign. But I think they've got a big game on Sunday, so that may well decide it.
Yeah, a question here from Finley. Any talk about scouting and talk with our affiliated clubs? Just more promptly about the data element, Connor. That was something that was referenced quite regularly throughout the AGM meeting. Obviously, you've got Ben Napper, who's very much a data-driven sort of individual. He's worked in sort of organisations previously that have been very much data based. Of course, he's worked at Arsenal, where there's going to be lots of statistics banded around. Mark Atanasio as well was something obviously he's worked in American sports. Lots of data involved in that as well. Is that something that you could see Norwich using a lot more moving forwards, based off kind of the comments that were made last night?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear Atanasio as well refer to this desire to build a kind of internal data system, which is something that the Brewers have. It's something that certainly not many Championship clubs have, but there are definitely Premier League ones that do it, and that enables you to make the most of recruitment and be quite savvy with how you do it as well. And we've spoken about this before, but the way Norwich City's recruitment team has shifted kind of since Kieran Scott moved on really has been to a more kind of data driven approach. Now we can debate the successes of that. Ultimately, it's up to a sporting director and maybe finances to dictate which players can and can't be signed. But it's up to the recruitment team to obviously present potential talent, and then a decision is made on that potential talent. So it's always a complex one, I think, speaking about recruitment teams and kind of successes and failures and all of that stuff. But yeah, the data aspect I think is really encouraging, because you look at the work that Brentford have done, that Brighton have done, even that Luton have done. All of that has been very data focused, and all of that has been about maximising all of the opportunities, I guess, within your setting, particularly if you don't have the deepest pockets. And often it can be a route to helping you to compete with teams that have significantly higher pockets, particularly in the Premier League. Now, naturally, with that comes times where you may need to go and invest in a player. And this is where the Mark Atanasio element is really interesting, because it will be up to Ben Napper to go and make a case to him. Look, let's pick a situation. I found this really great 21-year-old in Brazil that is going to cost us £6 million, but I think he's going to be excellent. I think he's going to add to the group. We're going to develop him. His ceiling is here. We're going to sell him for there. That's going to be up to Ben Napper to try and create those arguments, and then it's going to be up to Mark Atanasio and his group to fund that if they so wish. And then there's also probably times where if you do that, it's the opposite approach. Where can you maximize in terms of free transfers, in terms of loans? Where can you get value for money for players who are maybe playing in divisions that have relative quality to the Championship? Some like Poland, the Czech Republic, where there are lots of really good deals to be struck for players who just aren't being scouted. And obviously, there's been a slight kind of relaxation in terms of the Brexit regulations, which means now exploring those markets is a lot more possible, because you essentially have 4 slots to sign players outside of the kind of regulations that have been put in place, and Norwich don't have any of those slots used up at the moment. So I think all of that will flow into recruitment and change how they recruit at this moment in time, which particularly in the summer didn't feel particularly data led. It felt more about, let's go and pick Ashley Barnes because he's a great character and has lots of experience. Shane Duffy likewise. George Long, well, that came from Paul Clements. So I do feel that there is a shift now coming in terms of that. So that's all really good and encouraging. And like I said, on the horizon, it does. I really appreciate it doesn't feel like this at the moment, but there is some good stuff happening that is on the horizon. Appreciate that doesn't change where Norwich are right now, but there was some comfort, I think, to take from some of the stuff that Ben Napper and Mark Atanasio in particular last night were talking about, alongside obviously the stuff that has caused concern, which I know we'll come on to.
Yeah, we'll come on to that now. I think we've waited 35 minutes and the people probably want to hear our thoughts and comments on the sort of negativity, I suppose, of the fan base, which was something that Delia was quite vocal on. Said that if she was a player, she wouldn't want to go in and play in that environment. Kind of spoke about 20% of the fan base being whingers, 80% being fantastic, who she loves dearly, and kind of the interaction she has with fans is generally positive. I mean, I'm going to read Hux's tweet actually here on Twitter. It's not that difficult, and the same at every club. If you're terrible, you get booed. If you play well, you get cheered. If you play exceptionally well, you get remembered. If you can't take criticism, you're in the wrong business, which I think is a pretty spot on assessment. Yeah. Just kind of on that, Connor. I mean, there was a line as well about Portsmouth. If you've been to Portsmouth plenty of times and they're 6-0 down, they're still behind their team. I don't really necessarily agree with that statement. I think, if any team that the 6-0 down is, I thought Norwich fans at Plymouth is a great example of that. They were 6-2 down and they were still cheering the boys right till the last minute. She spoke about the kind of drummer element as well. There was lots of points around it. What do you take on all that, Connor? Because it was quite a topical conversation. It got quite heated in the AGM as well as kind of the interview with ourselves.
Yeah, I think. So firstly, I've never been to Fratton Park and to Portsmouth, so I can't really comment on that. It's up to Portsmouth fans to say, I guess. I think Hux's tweet there is absolutely spot on. It encapsulates it perfectly. What I would say, and you referenced Plymouth, and you're 100% right to do that, but I would say since the start of the season, Norwich City fans have been tremendous, really, really tremendous. I go back even to that whole game. They went 1-0 down on in the first 20 minutes or so of the season. Given how last season ended, the dross really that they were served up, that could have really turned. It didn't. They roared the team on. They got a goal. You mentioned Plymouth. Norwich fans have tried. They've tried, but ultimately you are responsive to what happens on a football pitch, and it is up to players to carry responsibility to try and do that. It is a bit chicken and egg, this argument, isn't it? It goes on forever, but ultimately the fans can only respond to what they see. I just don't agree that there is this base of fans who are negative come what may. I just don't buy that. I think there are fans who obviously will naturally be more negative than other people in the same way that if we brought 4 people into this video and we spoke about life generally, you would probably get 2 of them that were pretty negative about life and looked at it as a glass half empty, and 2 who looked at it as glass half full. That's just being a football fan. That's football fandom. How an individual or a group of fans feel about their team is born from so many different aspects: on-pitch performance, off-pitch direction. I've said it before. I've written about it. For me, it's just a lack of or fans asking, what are we getting behind here? What is the objective? What is the long-term aim? What is the goal? What is David Wagner trying to do with this group of players? Why are they playing in this way? Why are they approaching games in that way? 1,300 Norwich fans went to Watford on Tuesday night. It was freezing cold. It was on TV. It was an 8 o'clock kickoff. It was a late night for a lot of them. I've seen away ends up and down the country that Norwich City fans feel time and time again. It's miles from anywhere. I just think it's a really difficult and deflection, really, for me from some of the key issues. And I think ultimately, look, fans are never wrong. Even when they're wrong, they're not wrong. You can't go and, for me, pick fights with them and be critical of them, particularly when your on-pitch performances at the moment have been as poor as they've been. It's not the fans' fault that Norwich can let up 3 goals at Watford. And I have to say, when it was 2-0, they were terrific. They were completely behind the team. So it's for me, I think no one at 2-0 on Tuesday night is singing for David Wagner to go, is being negative towards their team. There's some gallows humour in there. Of course there is. That's the situation. But this idea, I think, that fans are being negative for the sake of being negative is just for the birds, really. And also, I mean, I would throw it in, and Finley's made this point as well in the comments. Season ticket prices at Norwich City are, I think, higher than anywhere else in the Championship. They're paying good money. So I think they are well within their rights. If they do not feel they're getting value for money, if they don't like the football that they're watching, they are well within their right to be critical, to be negative. It's up to the players and up to the people who make decisions. You live and die by those. If you get them wrong, you get criticism in the same way you do in any line of work, maybe not to the same scale, admittedly. And if you get things right, people will cheer you. And if you produce, people will love you. And that gets back to the heart of what Darren Huckabee said in in his tweet. Norwich fans are very patient. They're very, very patient. They've been very, very patient. This is now really 2.5 years since that Premier League relegation, where the league finishes 13th. At the moment, they're sitting 14th in the Championship. I just don't really know, like, this idea that everyone should be holding hands and clapping in unison. I just don't really feel that that's the right one. They're concerned about the direction of their football club, and the only way they can vent that really is on a match day, and is through the vocalization of booing or whatever. And whether you agree with booing or whether you don't, ultimately it is fans venting frustration. As Mark Atanasio said last night, ultimately at its core, that's proof that they care. And I think comments like this don't help with the feeling that a lot of them will have at the moment. And we've discussed this before in the podcast of why am I bothering? I'm not enjoying the football. The results aren't great. I don't really know what I'm believing in. It's just not helpful, I think. And I think there'll be a lot of fans, and I think we've seen that today on the reaction of social media. There's some people, it's worth saying, Delia made a similar comment in the room, and there were some applause for the way she said it. So I think it's worth offering that for balance. But I don't agree with what she said, or particularly how she said it, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that for me was sort of the pinnacle of it. Is that there's 1,100 Norwich fans travelling to Bristol for a 1:30 kickoff on a Sunday. This is a fan base that loves their football team, and ultimately they've been served up as a dross really ever since that 2018-19 magical season, because obviously the magical 2021 season, title winning season, was behind closed doors, so they weren't there to visually see it for the front of their eyes. And quite frankly, some of the decisions that have been made at different points by sort of those in power have probably been questionable, and the fans are right to have their opinions on that. Moving forwards, Connor, how do you see this playing out? Because there's going to be, I feel, a lot of anger and frustration in this fan base now that's been fueled more by these comments. The anger was almost at David Wagner and kind of the situation at the moment that was on the field. Some of the players obviously as well that probably get the right level of criticism, but now it feels like maybe the dial's turned and it's all now kind of on those comments that were made last night. It's added something that probably didn't really need to be added in the current situation. So how do you see this moving forward? Is it maybe a blessing that Norwich are away this Sunday and not at home? Because I feel like the reaction at Carrow Road, if it would have been a home game this weekend, could have been quite nasty.
You should have put a Dean Smith mask on then when you were saying that. Possibly right. To be honest, I think I've already got visions in my head of Norwich City going 1-0 down and chance of it's, like we heard at Luton last year, of it's always our fault. It feels a little bit like pouring petrol onto the fire. And as I said, I think the time you make these comments is, and to be fair, at the start of the reign, I know people talk about Stuart Webber being quite provocative in terms of a lot of the stuff that he said a lot of the time. But for me, Daniel Farke did it the right way. I remember there were points in Norwich City's Championship title winning season where he was quite critical of supporters and atmosphere and how they responded to certain situations. But you can do that because you've got credit in the bank, because you get the right sort of reaction, because the circumstance and the context is really different. And you're right. We spoke a little while ago about almost Ben Napper requiring time to come to a considered decision. It just heats and inflames the whole situation around everything, around the fans' feeling to the football club. And I'm just not sure it helps anyone, because let's say there is a base of 20% of Norwich fans. If you're taking 20% of Carrow Road, that's what, about 6,000? That's what, the Barclay maybe? So if all of those go, yep, all right then, well, we're not going to renew our season tickets, then the club's in a really difficult situation. I don't think they would do that. So yeah, look, you're right. It just doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help David Wagner. It doesn't help Ben Napper. It doesn't help Norwich fans. It doesn't help anyone. And it's certainly, a lot of the stuff that we should be talking about, and we have spoken about in terms of the long-term picture and some of the stuff that they're looking to implement and change and do that's really positive, has been eroded because of this stuff again. And I think Norwich fans are just really fed up of being kind of, I don't want to say picked on, because they, most of them, the majority of them are grown adults, but I just think a lot at the moment there is this perception, rightly or wrongly, that they are being blamed for stuff, that they are being blamed for being negative, for not being accepting, for not being for kind of supporting the direction of travel. But like I say, if you're in a football ground, that is the one opportunity that you get every week to voice your views on the state of play. You can't, if you're a fan, you can't go and knock at Delia Smith's door and tell her what you think of the football team. You can't do that. You do that in a situation at Carrow Road. So look, it's really difficult, and the thing is, I'm sat here going, it was just really preventable. I just don't think it was the right time to say it, either in the AGM or afterwards. So, it's not helped matters, and it's going to be really interesting, like you say, that the response of supporters at Bristol City, and then I guess at Carrow Road next week against Preston. That's probably going to be the ultimate test. And I think if you're Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones at the moment, you're probably hoping that more than ever that they record 2 wins in those 2 games.
Yeah, I think particularly given it's kind of one of the touch points you get with kind of the power that be in the football club in a year, the AGM, you get the shareholders interaction. We obviously in previous past and maybe not in the last couple of years have been able to speak to those in the power positions, and it's kind of that interview that's now going to sit there for quite a long time and not really have another updated sort of version at any time soon. So it's quite going to, I suppose, stick in fans' heads, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's narrative as well, isn't it? It kind of fuels the narrative that they're, again, rightly or wrongly, whether that's a just narrative or an unjust narrative. I think probably you could look at it in between. Some of the criticisms are fair. Some of the criticisms, perhaps over the last 18 months, have been quite extreme. There was a nice line right at the start of the interview, actually, from Mark Atanasio, where he said, "What I've learned in professional sports is that things are never as bad as you think, and they're never as good as you think. They're always somewhere in the middle." And it just feeds this narrative at the moment that supporters aren't being listened to, their opinions aren't being heard. It's not helpful. And for Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones, who for 28 years have been a beacon of that and have been so big in terms of listening to supporters, communicating with supporters. She spoke in her interview last night, speaking to supporters on a regular basis, going into the Lion and Castle, being that kind of presence and having that visibility to fans, which all owners don't have. I think it just feels, for a lot of fans, it will feel a little bit like a kick in the teeth, particularly from 2 majority shareholders who, for a long time, have tried to make the case of their fandom leading kind of what they're trying to build at the football club. So it does feed that narrative, as you say. It sits there, it becomes unhelpful. Similarly, I guess, to what Stuart Webber, his interview that he gave towards the end of that Premier League season, a lot of it was taken out of context and snippets get picked out of it. And that's kind of where we are again with this, I feel, rightly or wrongly.
Yeah, well, just before we kind of go into a few more comments and questions to round off, just want to get your sort of take on the 3-year plan. It was a point that was questioned to Atanasio and kind of the, I suppose, eventual takeover that he'll have and take power of the football club. Just the comments that were sort of surrounding that. What sort of did you take? Is that something that you see moving forwards, or could you see this process being potentially, I suppose, accelerated if different issues or matters arose?
Yeah, I think it entirely depends on situations on the pitch, because at some point, and we've all seen the accounts, and we know how much Mark Atanasio has loaned to Norwich City. There will be a financial imperative. This is, he's in a really favourable situation at the moment. Obviously, if they go and get promotion to the Premier League this season, which, as they would argue, they're still 6 points outside the top 6. That's still a possibility. I recognise it's asking a lot of people to believe in fairies at this moment in time because of the feeling, but let's say somehow you go and do that, it completely changes the complexion of the debate. If Norwich are looking at Championship football next season without parachute payments, that, I guess, dependability and need to lean on him and his group and their financial kind of support will be great. And at some point, that will move. So I think that there probably is a feeling and an expectation that this kind of 3-year spell, which is January 2026, was started in January of this year, by the way, that will probably come to a head sooner. And I guess there's a natural kind of age element to all of these conversations as well. So let's wait and see. But Mark Atanasio said it last night. He's really keen to be more involved. He's getting more involved. He's enjoying it. He's here for the long haul. And I think they feel that they can really help. And I think, goodness me, do they need help in certain areas? So I think there probably is a sort of wait and see element to that question. And it is going to be fascinating to see how it all transpires from here.
Yeah, we'll delve into some comments and questions for the last 10 or 15 minutes of this broadcast. Ben Trafford here saying, do you think they're keeping Wagner as a shield until the Ipswich game? Where will they sack him? Inevitably, when we get tonked. They've been bringing a new manager who doesn't have to worry about the derby until later in the season. thoughts on that one, Connor? Because we're actually speaking about this with Rob Butler. Funny enough, after the interview last night, he spoke kind of about managers in the past where maybe they've been under pressure, they've got that derby game and got a victory. It almost buys them that little bit more time because they've won that big game of the season. I think he said Brian Hamilton had a very similar.
I wasn't born, Adam, so I wouldn't know.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I'd say that's true. What's your take on that one, Connor? Is it a case of keeping David Wagner till the Ipswich game, or do you think there could be a switch before then, and maybe even a defeat on Sunday might be enough to tip the balance?
Yeah, I just don't think that's a position. Well, I hope that's not a position that they are adopting, because to almost throw the towel in ahead of an East Anglian derby, if that's kind of, if we're going along kind of the train of thought that you said there, I think would be phenomenal, really, particularly if you've still got aspirations of trying to get promoted. They need to go to Portman Road and try and win, as difficult as that sounds. And you're right, it can make and break a manager, and it is on the horizon. And maybe, it was argued at the AGM last night by a few shareholders that actually maybe a lot of the feeling that is being felt at the moment is partially down to what Ipswich Town have done and have created this season and the way that they've done that. I just don't think that you can plan in that way. You can't say, well, we're going to keep this guy and basically send him there to be shot at for the derby, and then we'll make a change thereafter. You could, of course, make the argument and say, well, you could make a change afterwards and make sure that you have a managerial bounce heading into that game if that's what you want to do. I just don't think Ben Napper operates in that way. I think he will almost be not disregarding it in terms of the significance of it, but in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's about long-term success. It's about long-term pictures. And for me, there's maybe this debate now of they've got an aging squad. Do you bring in a coach who has a short-term reaction with that squad? That's quite difficult, I think, because if they do that, then that might not necessarily be someone, I guess, similarly to what we saw with Wagner when he replaced Smith. That might not be somebody who is beneficial for Norwich City in the long term. What you might actually have to endure is appointing someone and enduring more pain, because you're going through process of shifting squads and shifting the age profile and all of these different dynamics. So I think there's probably an element of timing there to consider. I would be absolutely gobsmacked if the Ipswich game was any was in their heads at all in terms of the David Wagner decision. Like I say, it's events, isn't it? If Norwich City go and lose 5-0 on Sunday, it becomes an irrelevance, I think. If of course they go and win the next two, it becomes an irrelevance. So you have to be a little bit more considered, I think, than just looking at that game and thinking that it's one that you have to, throw everything at or almost take the shots of. I don't think you can approach it in that way. That would be naive to me. That's not conducive to getting success in the long term, which ultimately is the remit of Ben Napper.
Yeah, question from Sarah Peck. Are we going to get investment into the squad in January? I mean, funny enough, Neil Adams kind of fended off a question about kind of the sales of some sort of expensive assets, I suppose, in previous times, the likes of Max Aarons, Androm Bamadeli, Barley Mumba, I think the shareholder referenced. And well, based on that question, Connor, I mean, Ben Napper kind of spoke about sort of assessing the squad. I think they've had board meetings behind the scenes where they're maybe looking at kind of the age profile of the players, the contracts of the players, and which players maybe will be here past this season and sort of in here, I suppose, in the building for future projects, whether that be with David Wagner or another manager. On the investment point there, given the financial situation at the football club at the moment, can you see there being any sort of investment in players in the January window?
Yeah, I can. I think if Ben Napper makes that case and wants to make that case, I think the noises from Mark Atanasio is that he'll be supported in doing that. And what you have to recognise is he has said very much, and said it directly last night, the age profile of the squad is too high. Well, January is the first opportunity he's got to really try and make an impact on that and try and change it and to try and lower it. So I think there will be a willingness to be active. How active and quite how they do that, I think there's still some investigation to be done, and it will all flow into what he spoke about in terms of this football audit and going to present a case to the board. And as I said earlier, if he makes the case that he's found a talent that he believes is worth investing in, that has a high ceiling, that helps with Norwich City in terms of player trading and thus their financial model, I think there will be that backing of him to go and do that. So it's rare that we say it, but I think January could be a busy month for Norwich City. How busy? Of course, it's a very difficult month and time to operate in, notoriously, and whether that is a couple of loans that just bridges a gap towards maybe a bigger rebuild from next season, we'll see. But I get the sense from what Ben Napper said and from what Mark Atanasio said that both of them are very much of the opinion that there should, maybe even will be movement in January, which I think, again, speaking about long-term stuff, and it's not that long month. It's long-term. Sorry, it's 1 month to today. Yeah, I think there is a reason maybe to be optimistic. But again, I don't think it will be signings that maybe will necessarily help Norwich in the here and now in terms of pushing this squad up the table. I think it will be more about players who could bring success and yield results in year 2 of their time at the club, in year 3 even. And that maybe is where this shift needs to happen within the Norwich fan base. But of course, as I said, I recognise that does nothing to address the situation that they're in at the moment.
Yeah, I thought we probably covered most of the AGM topics there.
What about the pies? Are they too hot? That's what we need to get.
Yeah, that is actually on the bottom of my list here. If you had to choose a pie, Connor, when you've been to Carrow and had a pie before, which pie are you choosing? And I suppose, have you been happy with the temperature of the pie?
I tell you what, we don't really get pies at Carrow. I think we had a few towards the end of last season, but we've been to an away grounds and had pies. I think most recently was Cardiff. That was a very nice pie. No soggy bottom, none of that. Very nice. For me, I avoid anything with mushrooms in. I'm very odd, so I like raw mushrooms. Obviously, the ones that you can eat, not the ones that kill you. But I don't like them cooked. Just don't like the change in consistency and texture. I appreciate that's weird. I get told all the time. So for me, it's anything sort of meat, veg, very standard, gravy, anything like that. Chicken and veg pie, anything like that is good by me. And obviously, as you know, Adam, I'd avoid anything bolty or anything curry related. That for me is not one that I would have high up on my list.
Yeah.
What about you? What would be your go-to pie?
Anything steak and ale, those kind of lines. Quite partial to a pie. To be fair, do enjoy a pie. If we're on these away trips and we managed to get some food in before, then that's always a win for me. Matt Blake saying always pies in the Snake Pit kiosk.
Are they too hot though, Mark? That's what we need to know.
We need to know the temperature of the pies. Peaky here saying people buy into projects though we are patient. If something is there, has a tangible viewpoint, then I can see it being a great move. Sue Cassidy, not sure on the pie, but sausage rolls.
This is what we need to be discussing.
So we've fueled the AGM fire that around pies here, and it feels like everyone's given us some views. A few more questions here away from pies. Ben Trafford saying, is Napa more up for chatting with you than Webber, or is it more of the same? We actually had a off the record chat with him a couple of weeks back now, and he kind of spoke about he's available for us in terms of questioning, but maybe not going to be, I would say, as vocal moving forwards in terms of interviews regularly like we got with Stuart Webber previous to kind of the fallout that we had with him. Would you agree with that assessment there, Connor?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Yeah, I think that would be the expectation that I have of him, which is a shame because I actually think he's a very, very good talker. So that's but it is what it is. I can also understand why they maybe don't want to nail their colours into the mast in the same way they did with Stuart Webber, where there's almost an expectation that he comes out and speaks after every transfer window or whatever. So look, hopefully we hear more from him. That would be nice on the record, because as I said, I think he's someone who has lots of interesting stuff to say, and the kind of direction of travel that he wants to take Norwich is very positive. So hopefully he can come out and communicate that, and fans get to hear it, because that would be nice.
Yeah, Mr. Bish here saying, do we think we could get some Arsenal youth signings using Napa's contacts would be potentially cheap and bring down the age of the team? I mean, that's probably an easy assessment to kind of make, I suppose. I think when David Wagner arrived, a lot of people felt maybe they'd go down the Liverpool route, given him and Klopp's connections. We've not seen any Liverpool loan signings, but what I would say is Napa's got a very good contacts book. Obviously, would have done a lot of scouting when he's been to watch the Arsenal loan players at their various clubs across the continent. It's pretty confident to say that he's probably got lots of players in his sort of remit, I suppose, that it could potentially be of Norwich City interest, or someone that they could bring to Carrow Road. We'll probably just touch now very briefly on the Bristol game. Connor, of course, will be making.
Is there a game? Is there?
There is a game. Yeah, I was going to say. I feel like all the sort of, I suppose, noise and pressure around David Wagner's been completely shifted away from him for sort of 24 hours or so. We have got the press conference coming up with him in an hour and a half. It starts, so that's why we've got to wrap this up pretty short order to make the trip to Colney. Just on the Bristol game, how are you feeling, Connor? Because obviously you've got the fan frustration after the Watford game, going down to Bristol, 1,100 of them. then they've got this element of kind of the frustration based off the comments made last night. How do you think it's all going to transpire on the pitch for the Canaries?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really difficult game. Really like Liam Manning as a coach, very progressive, wants his teams to play really attractive possession-based football. I think you only need to see what he did in year one at MK Dons, but also what he did subsequently at Oxford. I think he's a manager that will get Bristol City up the table with how he wants to play. They want to dominate the ball. They're very good in the first half against Southampton by all accounts. I think he's worked a lot on kind of possessional and defensive elements. I think he will look to add kind of the attacking stuff a little bit later, but that is someone who I think will be a Premier League manager one day. So it's going to be really tough for Norwich City, particularly in the way that they are. I hope that we see a little bit more control from Norwich. However that looks, the lack of control in games has been such a huge concern, I think, to me in particular. Whether they decide to do that without the ball or with the ball, I just think it's important that we see some sort of control in that game. My fear is that maybe they'll go and approach it in the same way that they've approached the last two games. And if they do that, with the amount of possession and chances that I think Bristol City will create, I think it could be a potentially very difficult afternoon for them.
Yeah, a few score predictions coming through here. Tom Carlton feeling very confident from the looks of it. Bristol 5, Norwich 0. Sue Cassidy also not seeing Norwich getting anything at Bristol, feels it might be toxic at Carrow Road next weekend. Yeah, I think it's going to be a difficult afternoon. Peaky, here we go, with 4-1. I'm assuming that's to Norwich. Peaky, you can go and tell us in the comment section below. But yeah, Righty with a comment here, and 20%, 80% kind of scenario. How many of the 1,100 will be hoping for a really negative result to force the hand? Questions around David Wagner from Liam here. In January, Wagner's year is up. Does he go on to a rolling contract? Does it cost them more to dispose of him? Colin, do you just want to outline kind of the situation there with his contract?
Yeah, happy to clear this up. It's exactly the same as Stuart Webber's was. So as it stands, David Wagner's contract is due to end as rolling contracts worked on the 1st of December 2024, and tomorrow it will be the 2nd. That's how a rolling contract works. So there's not this kind of break point in January that maybe some people have suggested. This is a rolling contract, so he will always have a year on that contract, if that makes sense. So yeah, his contractual situation basically doesn't shift.
Yeah, hopefully that's cleared that question up. Peaky saying we'll go 1-0 up and concede 4 after the 15-minute mark. Seems like a familiar theme from Tuesday night at Watford. Connor, just going to ask you for a score prediction before we round off and head to Colney. Are you feeling as confident as the punters in our comment section?
Yeah, probably. I'll go for a 2-1, Adam. I think 2-1 to Bristol City. Sorry, okay. I'll clarify.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I could see it being a pretty difficult afternoon, and unfortunately another defeat, which would make that Preston game very interesting, regardless of whether David Wagner's in charge or not, given kind of the situation that we spoke about for the previous hour. Peaky with a lovely 40-minute journey. I wish we had a 40-minute journey on Saturday. Mark coming in late with a 3-1 Bristol. So with that, we're going to round off the show. We'll be heading to Colney pretty shortly, so you'll have David Wagner's press conference coming up on the Pink 'Un YouTube channel, and across, obviously, all the quotes will be across the Pink 'Un different digital platforms. Talking of digital platforms, we've got an offer at the moment on the Pink 'Un Plus. You can get a free month subscription for only £3, so that's a perfect opportunity to read everything AGM. You can obviously buy it for someone for Christmas if you want to, I suppose they'd have to endure some pretty difficult pain maybe following Norwich City over their Christmas period with their Pink 'Un Plus subscription, but hopefully the content will be worthwhile. You can also take out a £24 annual subscription, so we feel that's pretty good value for the product that we're delivering. On the press conference, Connor, how are you feeling about that one? Is it kind of interesting to see what David Wagner has to say about some of the fallout, I suppose, from last night?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's always interesting to hear from David Wagner. So yeah, looking forward to it, and let's kind of see what gets said and whatnot.
There we go. Peaky with a lovely comment there. Worth it if you don't have it. I'm hoping that's about the Pink 'Un Plus app. Yeah, we like the product and we feel that it's good value. So hopefully, if you've not joined us on the journey, then you might head over to the pinkun.com website, and you can find out all the details there to how to sign up. And with that, we're going to head off to Colney, as I said, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you're traveling to Bristol, whether it be a 40-minute journey or the sort of 5-hour journey we'll have to endure from Norwich, of course, safe travels. Hopefully you're rewarded with some sort of a positive performance after some of the sort of difficult trips and difficult performances we've all had to endure in recent weeks. And with that, we're going to round off. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you very, very soon.